There's just no permission to completely walk away. And that is such a blessing, even if we don't think of it that way, or it doesn't always feel that way. It's such a blessing because we don't have the ability to create that, try as we might, anywhere else. And it feels like, in a way, family is the way God creates that for us, and puts that protection in place. John, I wanted to talk to you about something else that I had the misfortune of watching this week. And that is, there has been, it seems like an increase, although I will say my husband is a big baseball fan, and he claims that this sort of tension inside baseball parks is nothing new. Maybe the intensity of it, and it also seems to have spilled over into airports and airplanes. But there's just been a lot of fighting now that people are not locked up in home. So there've been a rash of fights among fans in baseball fields. There was one at a White Sox Cardinals game between a couple of women that got pretty violent. I think that was this week or last week. Then there was a fight at a Dodgers Astros game as well. There was an NBA game. A fan dumped a bunch of popcorn on Russell Westbrook, which is a player who got hurt. And as he was leaving the court, somebody poured popcorn on him. Another fan spit on a different basketball player at Madison Square Garden as he was leaving the court. And then, of course, there have been all sorts of reports of violence on airplanes, after arguments over who's wearing a mask and why should I wear a mask and why aren't you wearing your mask and all that kind of stuff, I think between passengers, but also directed at stewardesses or people working at the airport, which I'm not going to ask you if any of these involved the TSA and you. We'll just leave that on the honor system and hope that you behaved yourself as you were going to and from the Wilberforce weekend. But
they did not. I can say that definitively. Although I do think that the lack of trust in institutions, something that we're going to get to in the next segment, if you come and catch us on the podcast, has something to do with this. Yeah. And I do think that that's part of the case. But I think this is really interesting, and it's also really troubling. Mm-hmm. The challenge here is that we don't know that there has been a rise, for example, just within sports environments. But there's a couple others from this past summer that we haven't even talked about that had to do with AAU games, players punching refs. There's a handful of those that again are quite recent. There's a video that surfaced at a convenience store where a man punched a woman because of something that either she cut in line or something that she said. There is, of course, this the tweet, the Karen trend, where you find someone, typically a female, going off about something that they don't like, and you call her a Karen on social media, and how quickly it escalates both between this person getting really upset, sometimes about things that don't even matter. That's the joke, of course. And then also, then feeling it's completely okay to publicly humiliate that person. And of course, if we're talking about, some of the racist incidents we've seen, that's a completely different, question than, just some of the stuff, though, that seems to be trending. So we have talked for a while that there does seem to be a increase in both what we call deaths from despair. That's documented when you talk about overdoses, when you talk about suicide, suicidal ideation. But I think understanding that at its root cause means also understanding the lashing out that we're seeing, what we have termed acts of desperation. Basically just trying to do something to not lose the meaning and the purpose that you have, or to find it, or to just, it's kind of like lived out Rage Against the Machine, to quote that 90s, not very talented. I'm gonna get hateful mail for that one. I didn't think they were very good, but anyway, you know what I mean? Kind of the whole 90s kind of grunge, despair sort of thing, the Alanis Morissette attitude about life in the world. And where does that go? Where does that go when you go from being, kind of an angsty 20-year-old into being a 30 or 40-year-old? That's the other thing about this. Some of these involve kids. A lot of these involve just adults, like people who should know better completely. who can't blame it on, the lack of neurological connections in their adolescent brain. It's hard to know where this is coming from, other than we are not a culture that is. Chuck Colson talked about our culture not doing moral formation, and that's how he understood the spike in crime. Over the several decades of his life, of course, we've seen a precipitous drop in crime, at least violent crime, in the last decade or so. But we're still at this place where there's a lack of moral formation. I guess what I'm suggesting here is there's a lack of identity formation as well. There's a lack of formation into meaning and purpose. There's a lack of formation around a telos or an end. So how do you live if you don't know what life is about? What do you do? And these stories are just piling up. And I don't want to turn anecdotes into data. Like I'm not sure that we are seeing just across the board a rise in this, but I tell you, there's a grumpiness,
Totally.
to people. They feel like they were sold what's not true from the president. They feel like they were sold what was not true from the media. They feel like they were sold what was not true from the pandemic. This was absolutely certain. Now this is absolutely not certain. Kids did not do well during the pandemic. We now have voices across the spectrum saying what should be obvious, that they did not do well as lockdown. And this is all in the larger context of kind of losing access to the things that have distracted us for so long, our sports and all that. And so maybe when something doesn't go the way we want it to, we overreact because we feel like that's all we got. I don't know, but there's a worldview analysis here to these stories that we're seeing.
Yeah. I wonder too if, some of the narrative that has been woven through everything since the pandemic started too has forced everybody to kind of watch everyone else's behavior in a way that we weren't necessarily doing before. I remember going into the supermarket like really quickly after the pandemic started. There wasn't even mask mandates yet. And I realized that whenever I opened the little plastic bags to put my vegetables in them, I would usually like lick my finger first to help me open the bag. And all of a sudden feeling like, oh, am I going to get kicked out? Like people are looking at me weird. Or that feeling of when you have to sneeze somewhere and you sneeze in public and you just want to say, it's allergies. I promise I'm not dying of COVID. But we certainly have created an environment now across the board where everyone's watching everyone else and everyone's ready to blame everyone else. You get sick and it's, you've killed grandma and it's your fault that X, Y, and Z. So everybody is on edge, I think, in that way. And everybody feels an unhealthy sense of empowerment to blame other people for even minor inconveniences because of that. But I also wonder if things like Twitter, and especially the way that, like you said, all of our other sort of more normal and outside the home distractions were cut off for so long and people were sitting at home and maybe on social media, have almost given us this sense, like people are interacting with each other now in person as if they're online, where it's, people are just angry. Like things go from 0 to 60 really quickly, like they tend to do online. And I wonder if that's part of it, that sort of the healthy checks that we put on ourselves, like, okay, you are in a baseball stadium. Other people can see you, including your child who's sitting right next to you. You need to behave yourself no matter how angry you get. Those checks don't seem to be, maybe aren't there like they were before because of how much time we've spent out of practice, I guess, in just being with each other.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea that we've talked for a while dealing with social media, and of course, folks like Andy Crouch and Kathy Cook and others have written about this, and we wrote about it in A Practical Guide to Culture. But this idea that we can be one person online and another person in real life, that's one of the lies of social media. I think it's an interesting thesis that I wonder if we are going into the direction that that we're now starting to treat people in real life like we treat them on Twitter. That's a fascinating thing. I mean, we certainly are looking for a Twitter moment, and now with NFTs, we're looking to capture them and sell them for a lot of money. So I wonder if there is something to that. Dostoevsky, speaking of Russian novelists, once said,
Name drop.
first art will You're welcome. First art, he said, first art will imitate life, then life will imitate art, then life will find its very meaning from the arts. And that's the journey in which it goes. So life imitates, art imitates life imitates art, then life has to be defined by the arts. And when you're talking about such a, how do I want to put it, such a downwardly defined reality like social media, we're certainly not talking about high art, but we are talking about a way of seeing life through the imagination, and it's a stunted imagination. And
it's like one step removed from reality.
Yeah, it is, but it can quickly confuse you and make you think that it is reality.
It made me think of
that's such a tempting thing.
It made me think of those scenes remember in Groundhog Day when Bill Murray, like he gets wise to what's going on, and then he's like, well, none of this matters. So he spends a couple days just like going absolutely bonkers and like making a fool of himself in front of other people because he's like, this isn't real. It's almost like if you thought you were in a dream and you would do whatever you wanted or say whatever you wanted. It almost has that sense about it, or at least I wonder if people are feeling that, where it feels like nothing's real, or it feels like the only way to feel feelings or to feel alive is to feel really angry and to express it and have other people watching you do it. And I just wonder if that's part of it. I could see that easily becoming part of how we function.
So I just finished a book, and it's going to be published here soon. I don't know all the details, so stay tuned. We're going to be talking about this book an awful lot, but it was given by a Wilberforce Weekend speaker from a year or two ago who has been doing work on marriage. And he's got some data kind of tracing back. In one of the chapters, he talks about we're fighting the smoke, not the fire, and the breakdown of the family and just how dramatically that affects so much. And he's trying to wrestle through both the church's calling and if, for example, if you're a patriot concerned about, whether America can be protected and we can defend freedom, you should care about the family. And if you're a church that cares about the spread of the gospel, well, I got news for you. Historically, one of the things that compelled millions and millions and millions, especially of women, to Christianity was the vision of the family. And if you want to deal with this dropout problem, right, of kids no longer identifying as religious or no longer being involved in religious services, in one of the chapters he talks about this study, and this is just an incredible finding, that if you take out the differences created by family breakdown, there's no difference in the generations from the boomers to the Xers to the millennials to Gen Z of those who identify as nuns. That literally that whole thing could be explained by family formation,
like statistically,
on a large trend line. Statistically, just looking at the numbers, that the predictor in all of this is not generation, although it's a bigger generation, although it's a bigger number coming out of the younger generation right now. And you know why? Because there's a bigger number of that generation that is being born in single-parent homes, cohabiting homes, and are dealing with family breakdown in one way or another. It is incredible. And I have said this for a while. I don't think we fully figured out what all the chaos we've created by allowing the family to be broken down, by, separating sex from marriage and marriage from parenting, and separating, husbands from wives, and all of that sort of stuff. Allowing, divorce to be a thinkable reality, outside of any other, extreme circumstance or whatever. I just think it's amazing to see the data in this book. And I think there's more there because you get your sense of identity, you get your sense of morality, you get your sense of loyalty from the family. And if the family's not there for that, and these other mediating institutions like, the Boy Scouts and even the church being less significant than before, and the church being less willing to tackle the really hard issues, and basically, so for so many, church is just a way to go get a kind of a boost every Sunday, an emotional boost every Sunday, that can get you through the week, or maybe a way to find community. But it's not really digging deep into who you are and what life is all about. This is not enough to sustain people.
Yeah.
And it's not just going to be people are sad or people increase in depression, and even people, kind of going all the way to despair. It's also going to be this despair taking the form of acting out in really, disturbing ways.
Yeah, that's powerful. We were talking about earlier the ways, the challenges of doing ministry on a platform like TikTok. And one of those challenges being that you can't possibly foster, true community on that. And, the church is supposed to be a place where we foster true community, and we stick with people, and we put up with things we wouldn't put up with outside of that context and all that kind of thing. But I think that family in some ways is the stopgap for when we fail, even in the church. There's a sense of the family that you belong to being permanent, unlike anything else that we create here on earth, where, even when people let you down or you let them down over and over again, there's just no permission to completely walk away. And that is such a blessing, even if we don't think of it that way, or it doesn't always feel that way. It's such a blessing because we don't have the ability to create that, try as we might, anywhere else. And it feels like, in a way, family is the way God creates that for us, and puts that protection in place. But I hadn't thought of that, and that makes me even more sad to think of the issues that we're seeing with fights and aggression and people being rude to one another in public, being a result of that. But that makes sense. It also makes it especially sad because one of these videos of a fight at a baseball park was between two grown-up men acting like children, just throwing punches at each other. And one of them, his little daughter, like 2 or 3 years old, sitting right there next to him. And some random fan, this woman who didn't know them, and she was interviewed on local news afterwards, came up and took the child out of the situation and was holding her. I mean, she was screaming, crying. I mean, it was truly disgusting, like the sort of thing that gives you a stomachache after you watch it. And that just makes you feel like, in some ways, this is going to be a self-perpetuating cycle. We do this in front of an audience.
It also doesn't. Yeah, doesn't it also highlight though that proverb? I mean, again, we spent so much time beginning of the year praying through Proverbs, and there's that proverb: "A soft answer turns away wrath." Mm-hmm. Like, that just sounds like good, cute advice, unless you're in a culture where everything is on the verge of explosion, and then suddenly it's a strategy. Suddenly it's like, you should do this because it actually will be a good gift to the world.
Yeah. So I'm just going to give a shout out to my husband and share one thing that he always says, which when he first told me this, it's sort of changed my life in a way and how I relate to people. So Aaron does a lot of lobbying. He likes to say he's a card-carrying lobbyist, and it always makes everybody groan in the room. But he does a lot of advocacy on behalf of Christian causes, and because of that job, he's in the media a lot and gets interviewed with newspapers every week and that kind of thing. One of the things he always says is, whenever you're in an argument or a discussion with somebody or a debate with somebody else, even if you have the upper hand, you could win this discussion, quote unquote, you always have to leave the other person an out that allows them to maintain their dignity. Because if you back someone into a corner and you just overpower them to the point of just humiliating them in front of everybody else, that's when things escalate to the point of violence, and they just degenerate into something that's beyond usefulness, So he always says, whenever he's talking to even the most ardent opponent of what he's doing, you have to consciously allow the person you're talking to an out. You have to let them maintain their dignity. And that's just been, I love that that's how he operates. And I think that's a really good word for all of us.